we go.
Hey, that's my lucky number.
Number 13?
Yeah, number 13.
I was going to say, I almost said your password out loud. I don't want anybody getting your bank account.
Good thing that's not it.
Taylor Swift.
I've had my password since I can remember the day I came up with it. It was 9th grade computer class.
Wow.
That was the first time a password was required.
Yeah.
So I just came up with some, and it's stuck. It's evolved quite a bit over the years, and we've added to it.
More complex.
Got more passwords now. The worst is when they don't let you use the password. They're like, you've already used this password. Like, well, yeah, it's my password.
I know. Yeah. Or it's like 6 months in, they're like, you used this password 6 months ago. I was like, I only have 2.
That's what I'm saying. I can only have so many passwords.
Or variations of the same thing.
That's it, dude. Anyways, welcome to I Bought a Farm. We looked just previous. Apparently, this is number 13. Lucky number 13.
Better than I thought.
Yeah, we were like
We're
8,
getting
9.
on. This is only the second one for this year, I think.
Third. We had Jeff Evans and we had Skalma.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So this is number 3. We got Madison Raber in the studio from Treestand Forestry. And we'll kind of get into our relationship here with Madison, but kind of the big topics that we've talked about it on the Hunter podcast more so, but is around making money off of your property. Acquisition of a property. How do you make money? And we've kind of teased out the conversation that on my Ohio place, I engaged with a forester.
Here
he is. To help me do a select cut timber sale, not only from an income standpoint, but we'll get into this with Madison. What Madison and I think really connected on was the fact we're trying to also improve the quality of the habitat for deer. So those two things, were always very important to me on this property. It just so happens Madison and I, in fact, you wrote us from the podcast.
Yeah, I did. Yep.
Which is crazy. And then it becomes a small world.
That was me. I received that message, I think, because Jeremy and I just run the same Instagram. I screenshotted it and sent it to Jeremy. I said, here's your boy.
Yeah. And so we talked, and I mean, obviously, Ben Rising, and so we've got mutual. Do you know Jed Caldwell?
Yeah.
Caldwell?
Yep.
Yeah.
Spelled like
not super well, but yeah.
Yeah, so Jed would have been north of you. So, we've got crossover crowds there, but so we kind of got connected and met out at the farm, and we'll go through it. But I guess maybe to start, unless you want to go somewhere with this out of the gate, I was going to just have you talk a little bit about your company as Treestand Forestry and really your background of kind of whatever comes with that.
My first thing was I was just going to ask, are you a private forestry consultant? Is that because we learned about the different tiers of, people might call themselves foresters or.
Because Ben's a timber buyer.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a bunch of different kind of breakdowns of that. You have your mills, and then you have, most mills have their, a buyer that works for them to go out and buy timber. And then you have loggers that are typically subcontract to the mills. Some of those loggers will also buy their own timber, and that's when you were talking about that 50-50 going on with Ben.
Yep.
That's what was happening there. And then you have there's guys that'll do almost wholesaling.
Yep.
Where they'll go in and get a piece of timber under contract, kind of posing as though they are the buyer, but then they'll just go and flip that contract.
Sell that contract
Same as like
out.
assigning a contract for a real estate.
Real estate, yeah.
The problem with that is they're not transparent on what they're making.
Sure.
On that, whereas a timber consultant is working primarily for the owner, and you're paying me directly. You know exactly what I'm getting paid.
Yeah, and transparently, we're paying you a commission.
Yep.
I'm paying Madison a commission on my timber sale, right? So obviously, it only benefits for us to bring the most money in. So therefore, based on commission, you're making the most money.
Yeah.
And what was the agreed commission? It was 10%.
10%.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, let's go with your private forestry consultant. What is your background? Because your family's been in the timber business, right?
So way back when Grandpa started logging, and Dad bought the business off of him when he was early 20s.
Wow.
And so that's all I've ever known. I grew up in it, was working summers, and I finished high school a year early and was out cutting timber and skidding when I was 15, 17 years old.
Wow.
And then I started driving truck around 18 years old, so I drove semi for a year and a half. Dad also has a trucking company that we haul our own logs. And then it kind of morphed into kind of stepping out on my own. I went and actually got my own crew on a small scale and did small jobs, went and bought my own timber. and then went back at one point and bought timber for Dad. And then full circle, now I'm doing consulting. And a lot of that has come, seeing all the different aspects of the business. Time and time again, I was seeing these guys, landowners, realistically were making more money working through a timber consultant rather than selling direct.
Right. And I think we hear that even in our real estate side a lot. I mean, how many nightmare stories have we heard from people where they're like, yeah, they cut my timber 10 years ago and I got $19,000. And you're like, what?
That's the real estate comparison is a good one. It's just like for sale by owner, and somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'll buy your house for $100,000. And you're like, that sounds pretty good. Until you talk to a realtor and they're like, yeah, this house is worth $150,000.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you're like, oh, okay. And then you pay the real estate agent a commission. It's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was what, when Jared and I first started talking, and really when
that's why people hate real estate agents.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when I bought the Ohio property, the first thing, because it was funny when we were talking to Ben, I think I sent you a picture and I sent Ben a picture, and I was like, hey man, seems like there's decent timber on this. And at that time we're in that was 2021. So we were in hey, if you don't buy it now, the next guy behind you is buying it. So I bought it. And, but I had sent Ben a message, and it was November 7th. It was funny when we were kind of recounting that on the podcast. It's November 7th, and I was like, hey, dude, I got a bunch of big white oaks. He's like, well, how big? I was like, I measured one. I was like, I think it's like almost 30 inches deep. He's like, okay, whatever. He's like, it might be good. I'm not sure.
That November 7th fog.
Yeah. And I mean, so, I'm going into it naive, just like, we talked into, I don't know what it's worth. Like Madison transparently could have came on and said, hey, yeah, it's worth $50,000. I'm like, great, cut it. Yeah. I had no idea what was out there. And I think that most people listening to this either go one way or the other. They have something that's really good and they don't recognize it, or they have something that's really bad and they think it's worth a lot more than it actually is. And it's probably that case more than anything, but you've got more experience.
Yeah, it varies quite a bit. Even back when I was buying timber, and even with what I'm doing now, I'll get a call and it's like, hey, I got some, pretty big trees. And you get there and you might have, half a dozen or a dozen that are nice, but you have to look at, it comes down to volume. Just because you have one slammer tree does not mean anybody's can be interested.
Sure.
So it kind of comes down to volume, and, and then it's also, I think people look at a tree and it's like, oh, it's tall, it must be worth a lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of what you need to be looking at is diameter, and then also, but if it's real short bodied and it's got a bunch of limbs coming off real fast.
You're talking about that big first log in the trunk. Yeah.
Yeah. If you got one, 10 footer and a bunch of limbs, that's a pretty low quality log.
What do they call that when it's stemming out? Is it stemming?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
It's a sign of distress, right? It's not getting enough sunlight, so it starts putting a stem.
Well, actually, I think you see it a lot in, for example, if you have a tree that's out in middle of a field, tends to do that a lot because it's getting so much sunlight. So when you start having competition in the forest, that forces that tree to grow taller to be able to get more length and be able to hit sunlight. So oftentimes there's actually too much sunlight coming in.
Will cause that.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yep. We're good. So, because on that log side of things, I don't know. Again, I'm naive. There's a veneer log, right? How big's that?
You can go down to, buyers will buy down to, and again, it varies so much on species. Because, a walnut log, they're going to be more lenient than, say, a hard maple.
Okay.
So a handful of species that can veneer, and I'm not going to get them all, but just a few of the top ones are, walnut, white oak, some red oak, a few poplar can be kind of like a veneer, and some hard maple. That's just a few of the top ones.
And is it a certain size of that log?
What is a veneer? What's the definition of a
so
veneer?
the veneer is not really anything to do with size or diameter.
So size doesn't matter?
No. Well,
you heard it here first.
But hey, we're all better for it, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about log size here.
Let me text my wife real quick.
So it comes down to the cleanliness.
Would you say
log.
this log is adequate? Sorry. Proceed. Sorry.
It comes down to the cleanliness of the log. So if you're looking at defects, and what I see as a defect is probably not what you see as a defect. I have a lot of people that come up and they got a walnut log and they're just like, this thing's perfect and it's straight and no limbs. And then you come out there and it's got a bunch of what we call cat faces on it. And it's like kind of inner knots that you can't really see, just real, just so you can see it on the outside.
Wow.
Little seams. And so the veneer, people have this idea that, a veneer log, well, if I have a tree, it must be veneer just because it's mine. You always overappraise what you think and what you own. And there's actually not that much veneer. I mean, it's, a veneer is a pretty special log.
Yeah, makes sense. And then also being that I own property in Kentucky, we hear stave logs a lot from a barrel side on the white oak.
Yeah, and that's specifically white oak. And then that is more so determined by diameter. So you can't have too big of a log be stave. It actually, a smaller log, for instance, can be better for stave.
Interesting.
And that has to do then with your spacing of the knots. So you need at least 3 feet in between the knots to be able to get a stave log out. So you could go down the rabbit hole of all this little stuff, but it's...
And in terms of, I guess, some of those buyers, are there people that are out there saying, like, I'm here to buy, like, I want to buy stave logs?
Well, hold on. I don't quite understand what they are yet. Like, a stave log and a veneer log, are those both terms referring to a quality?
Yes. So a veneer log can refer to, different species can be a veneer log.
Okay.
When you're talking about stave, you're specifically talking about white oak logs. And not even just like in the white oak family, specifically actual white oak. So in the white oak family.
So not like a chestnut oak.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. A chestnut would be in the white oak family, but you can't have
a stave log be a veneer log?
Typically not. I mean, the only scenario would be if it would be without knots, but it's too small to be a veneer log.
Okay. So veneer is a term assigned to a certain type of quality of those 4 or 5 species that you called. And they're of a certain size as well. So size and quality.
Yeah, I mean, it basically, once they get too small, there's not enough meat on the bone there to be able to make it veneer.
What do they get used for?
There's different ways of processing it, but it's basically, veneer is like the small layer on top of, some of that cheaper furniture you find.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that is the veneer that literally is coming from a veneer log.
But, I mean, that would be cheaper veneer, but, there's some walnuts that... get a lot of that stuff gets exported, to be honest.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah. Because, that's the stuff that, we go into it, right? And you walk on a property. Okay, there's
I've
a white
heard that
oak.
word a billion times.
A veneer
log. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I think it looks like a good log, so I'm assuming it's of a certain quality or something. But.
Well, and it's funny because, and for preference here, a lot of what we talk about is going to be Ohio, right? I mean, in terms of your business, where my farm is, where your parents' farm is. On the Kentucky side, the few contacts I've had, and most of them have been mills coming to me or buyers coming to me, not forestry consultants. But a lot of those guys immediately are like, "Yeah, we're interested in stave logs." Like that's the only thing they're there to talk about is let's see your white oak and let's see if we can get stave logs out of these things. So
are they only wanting to cut the stave logs then?
That's what it sounded like.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and again, this is why we're having this discussion from a forestry consultant side.
Well, I mean, just like you talked about with Ben, you're just high grading at that point. I mean, all you're doing is taking your good white oak off, and you're leaving nothing but the junk then. And so you go to, I mean, I don't know how much that'll affect the resale, but just as a general, management of timber, that's pretty terrible practice.
Yeah.
So when you harvest stave logs or veneer logs, you want to also be harvesting out other lower quality trees.
Yeah, and it comes down to what your goals are. So, I've seen guys where they'll go in and say they buy a property, and if their intent is to flip it pretty directly, to take a few of the really high-end timber off, but so long as you're leaving, a good mix of species and nothing but junk left, you can do that, by taking some of the better stuff off, get a little bit of your money back out of it, and then still have good timber there to sell. So that is possible. But in general, you don't want to only be taking good stuff out of the woods.
Sure. Interesting. I'm trying to think about we have that conversation a lot more on deer, and it's like it makes sense in a 4 or 5 year turnaround. Yeah, you want to try to shoot your 8 points out of there or whatever. Guys will do that. It's harder to imagine over the life of a forest. It's like, okay, this might be 30, 40 years, right?
So I want to get into that when we'll use my place as an example when we kind of talk through the progression of this thing, really, right, from, after cutting.
Let me ask you this. Why wouldn't you take all of the low quality trees out?
comes down to you're gonna have a hard time finding anybody interested in doing that. I mean, to find a buyer for that. And, you know, I had that discussion.
Is that where, like, TSI would come in? Like, the landowner could go and do that?
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of what it comes back to. I have a lot of times where I'll come out and it's like, you know, I got nothing but cherry and all this and that. And it's like, or a bunch of real small stuff that's not mature yet, but it's not good. It's just cherry and soft maple. And it's like, look, no logging company is going to pay you for that, and nobody is gonna want to come out and do it. So you have kind of two options. You can either do it yourself by cutting out that stuff, or, you know, there are companies, you know, more like your land clearing services, that type of deal.
But at that point, you're either not making any money or there's money coming out of your pocket
big time.
to do it. So, and we'll talk about that because Madison and I kind of put together a few select clear cuts on this property, which had timber kind of in that discussion point, which is for most people, there's not a market, it's undesirable type stuff.
Well, and you're basically leveraging your more valuable timber to be able to get that work done. It's worth the squeeze.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. So, okay, cool. So let's, I guess let's dive in on some of my stuff for example, because I think it's going to spawn a lot of conversations.
It's always about Jeremy.
I know. So transparency, if you haven't listened, it's 130 acres, Meigs County, Ohio, so southern Ohio down towards the river. And touch on that quickly. The one thing, and obviously we'll get into what we actually got out of this, but something I was naive to a little bit, but I heard it from Jed, was location.
Oh, yeah.
Like, in it, I guess it didn't, it's like, well, you know, I'm in Ohio, like, the timber's here, like, what do you mean? And I think Rising was actually the one who said, hey, you know, it's going to cost, I can't remember what the dollar, $400 or something per truckload.
No, well, I talked to him and that's off. I talked to one of the companies that was bidding on it, and like they actually, you know, own their own trucks and stuff.
Yep.
And they were figuring more like $700-800 a load
per load.
Yeah.
Wow. Why would it cost more if they own their own trucks?
Well, I mean, you have to run that as a separate business. So you're essentially, you know, you have to
your
make,
trucking company is a separate business. Like that's how you're running it.
And that's how Dad's
function.
Would be. Yeah. Okay. On his, you have to function as two separate businesses. So you have to have profit on that business as well.
So you're paying the trucking company.
Exactly. Yep.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That makes
and so, you know, and even if I was talking to Ben after,
$800.
Oh yeah.
For what?
For a single load.
To take
from where to where?
Well, from where most of these mills are located further up north, you're looking at 2.5 hours one way.
Okay.
And for that type of distance, you're looking at $700-800 per load of logs. And so
how can that be? So $700-800 for 5 hours of gasoline and to pay a driver. And
well, you're looking at, you know, 5 miles a gallon.
Okay.
So you're looking at a lot of fuel.
Literally, what is it? Can I
absolutely.
I figure it? You said 5 miles a gallon?
And what's it?
Yeah, 5, 6.
What's diesel right now? Like $5?
Yeah, close. Yep.
$4.50, $5
for a gallon.
Yeah.
What is it?
$4.50 to $5. Say $5.
Call it $5.
$5. So
okay, so $5 a gallon, and how many miles a gallon?
I think it was
miles a gallon. Is
miles
5.
a gallon is 5. I think it was 150 miles.
Yeah,
something like that.
So
take it times 30.
So 150 times 30 is 4,500 for gasoline.
$5 times 30 is 100
times 5 times 30.
Yeah,
that's gonna be way higher. 150 miles times 5 times 30 is 150, right? So 150 times.
Okay, hold on.
So that's 150 times 150. That's $22,500.
So if it's 5 miles per gallon, okay.
Yes.
And it's 150 miles. That's 30 gallons one way. That's $150. That's right.
Yeah, so 150. So that's just
ways.
One way. So that you're looking
at 30 times 5 is $150.
Yep. So $300 round trip gas
per
just
one
for
truck.
Fuel. Yeah.
Just
for one truck, and then you have to pay your operator, and then you have.
How do you pay them?
A lot of those guys are either by the hour. Back when I was, you know, driving truck, you'd be looking at, you have a percentage.
Yeah, I mean that's big CDL.
The total,
guys.
How much they made per load on that haul, basically.
Really?
Yeah. Yep.
Interesting.
Now, not saying everybody is set up that way, but that's how.
But even if it's hourly, I mean, CDL guys get paid.
Yeah, they're getting paid pretty good. So like something like that would have paid.
Well, they should. I was surprised to hear it's like a commission.
Yeah, I think about $300 a load probably.
Okay.
250, 300.
So there's $600 right there.
And then you have to figure, you know,
just
any kind of margin and, you know, break
300 is 450.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I was just curious. Yeah.
6.
Yep.
So, and I guess again, naive to, why are all the mills up there when
You
like,
tell me.
you know, it just kind of figuring like down where I'm at, there's a lot more, it seems like there's a lot more timber. Maybe not.
Is there room for a mill? Like what stopping for somebody from just saying, hey, there's a lot of timber here, I'm going to put a mill here?
I think you're looking at, so the weird part of it, and this is where it comes back to a lot of these mills, it's a super tight network, and they will sell to each other. So you have a lot of mills that'll specialize in one thing. And so a lot of the general timber, you know, your red oak, your poplar, a lot of your just general grade logs, these mills will saw themselves. And you have specialty mills that specialize in stave logs. Then you have specialized mills that'll just cut veneer, and even down to species sometimes. And so what ends up happening is, you know, somebody will buy woods and they'll haul stuff in, and then they'll start selling it to the guys around them, or
based on the contracts that they have with buyers.
Yeah. And so that kind of comes down to proximity helps to be able to accomplish some of that stuff and keep your costs down. It can be a little tough if you're kind of down away from that. But that example, that one that ended up buying this was 30, 40 miles further south. And so their trucking cost was less. And that helped with, I think that's ultimately why they ended up getting it.
Yep.
Are there markets that like, so I have a buddy that's in the forestry industry, and he's, you know, he's like, well, you know, and I'm trying to read through the lines here. So he's like, well, you know, there's basically buyers that will buy stuff directly from, the landowner, I guess, you know. So the sequence of events, as I understand it, is even if you use a private forestry consultant, ideally they're the one with this contact to the buyer. They may have a forestry crew come in of loggers and cut the stuff and lay it all out on the property. And then it gets sold directly to, like, this would be an extremely, like, a premium, you know, $2 a board foot to the landowner for white oak as opposed to like 50 cents.
Okay.
Does that happen?
You have some of that, and that, I mean, what I've seen quite a bit of is where a logger will go out and buy the timber. Well, and that's where the percentage comes in oftentimes. So these loggers will come out and they will work with the landowner and, like, hey, we'll guarantee you at least this much, and then we're going to drag it out or cut it, drag it out, have guys come in and bid on it, and then you basically split it 50-50 or 60-40, however that is. Does that make sense?
Versus how we did it, which was what, stumpage?
Right, yep.
Which means here it is as it stands.
Exactly.
Type of thing.
Yeah. So same guy basically was like, well, yeah, you never sell to the mills. The mills, exactly like you were saying, is they all are, you know, there's a relationship there. They sell to each other in some cases. They're like, yeah, you don't sell to the mills. I'm like, well, that's your main buyers, right? So
yeah. So, I mean, it has been my experience, because, I mean, I've worked with a logging company and I've worked with these mills, and, you know, I'm able to see hand in hand, and to be honest, the bigger mills are still the ones that are paying the top dollar. But the interesting thing about it is, you know, when they're going directly to, it's same as trying to buy, you know, an off-market property. I'm going to try and buy that for less. And so
you want it under market value.
What ends up happening a lot is a mill will try and underbid what it's actually worth. And so, you know, you have some of that. Now, a way to remedy that is working through a consultant. But ultimately, you know, I've seen time and time again, a mill typically can outbid just a straight up logger. Now, that's not always the case.
What's the difference between a mill and a logger?
So a logger will, you know, they can be out there buying their own timber, but then they are selling the logs to the mills.
So it's another transaction in between.
Yep.
Okay.
Now, they will at times...
The loggers work for mills, right? Like they're subcontracted by the mills?
There's both.
Okay.
So you have... most loggers are just simply subcontracted to the mills to accomplish the work that the mills purchase or the jobs. But then there's also, you know, for instance, you know, my dad's company, he has 3 crews. 2 of those crews are subcontracted to 2 different mills. And then he has 1 crew that he buys his own timber for. Then he will go out, buy that timber, and then sell it to mills. One of the benefits with working directly with a logger is usually they're a smaller company. They're going to be willing to just deal with more crap, honestly, on a job than what a mill wants to.
Yeah, they just want to come in, get it done, and get out.
A mill wants is, you know, they're looking at efficiency. I was talking to Ben, you know, their company, they're running 6 crews. For an example, 1 crew can move between 1.5 and 2 million board feet a year. So you're looking at buying what 12 million board feet a year, and like your property is 300,000.
Yeah.
So you're looking at buying a ridiculous amount of timber for one company.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy.
Cool. It's helpful.
So, to kind of walk people through the process, obviously, we connected on Instagram, but whatever. People need to, let's say they're in Ohio, they're going to call you, Madison, say, hey, Madison, here's where my piece is. I would assume the first thing is where you at, right? Because, I mean, if they're not in the right place, it's an uphill battle to try to even sell it.
Right.
Not only to where you're at, but proximity to buyers.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and so, kind of the region I operate, and when I got your text, I was like, as far as the location of the property, I was looking at that, I was like, well, you're right on the line. Because
Jed was the one who was like, not that he rolled it out, but he's like, you're down there.
Yeah.
You're south.
Any further west, and almost nobody would be interested in going
Which is
down
crazy
there.
because, like...
Well, Jed's comfortable with his territory. That's who cut, does all of our timber. And I gave it to him first. And Jeremy called him, and he's like, yeah, you're pretty far.
Yeah. Well, and I talked to Ben about it, and Ben was honest with me. He's like, listen, man, I'm a buyer, not on that aspect of things. And but what's funny when you say like Adams and Brown, which are significant deer hunting counties down there, but those are out there.
Yep. Yeah, and I get a lot of calls from that area down there.
Because it's big timber country on the river.
Yep. And, when it comes down to most mills don't want to travel much further than 2 hours. That's kind of their cutoff. For you, you have exceptional timber on that property, and that's why, I was at least willing to look at it once and see what you had. And I, after seeing it, I was pretty confident I could get somebody to come because you're right at 2 hours and 20 minutes from kind of the hub of everything.
Yep.
So I was pretty sure I could get buyers interested in that. But once you get, like I said, much further than, 2 hours, if you don't have premium timber, they're not going. Even at 2 hours, if you don't have good stuff, most people aren't going to be interested.
And I would assume, we mentioned, and we can kind of get into it, but I had 300,000 board feet, which is a fair amount. I would assume that plays into it too, because if it was only, let's say, 40,000 board feet, I don't think they necessarily are going to drive down for that.
Even
set up shop.
Even just for the white oak, I mean, it's so your next option would be you can sell to local guys, but I personally don't have and I'm not personally comfortable getting guys down in that area just simply because I haven't worked with them.
Sure.
And so I have to stand behind my my reputation of getting guys in that are going to do good work, and I need to be able to stand behind these guys. And, I mean, I'm not going to say there are not good guys down in that area. There very well could be. From what I've heard, you hear a lot of horror stories, to be perfectly honest. And so, that's kind of where
which is what which is why I was like, man, I don't know what I'm going to do with this
That
stuff.
seems like one of the only so Greene County is just west of us here, but it's the furthest southwest county in Pennsylvania. And I've come across some properties with some immaculate timber, like really good timber. We can talk about it after if you want. And like I've talked to people called Jed about it, and he's like, yeah, there's just there's a couple Amish crews here and there, but like there's not.
Yeah, nobody's cutting.
Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of when you don't have competition, that's where guys can get sloppy, and so they can buy stuff for a lot cheaper, and they're it's more or less a monopoly. So if somebody wants to sell their timber, there's only a handful of guys to go to, and they're, not going to be a good company should treat you well regardless, but, there's room there that they may not treat you as well.
Yeah. Why? I mean, what are your other options? It's just like anything.
Can we say who bought Jeremy's timber?
I would rather not say.
Okay. Where's
a timber company?
Where's Danoon located?
Danoon.
Is that Billy Danoon? That's, I think, one of the bigger mills I've been told in Ohio, like Eastern Ohio. That's who bought my parents' timber.
Gotcha. I'm not super familiar with that mill.
Is that who bought it?
Yes.
Gotcha.
And it was a mill or it was a logger?
Mill.
Okay.
A mill. Yeah, they run a big mill.
Yeah.
That is who, when I asked about this one in Greene County, again, when I asked Jed, he's like, that'd be, maybe your best bet just because they're so big, and it's, but yeah, they're not close. It's
because we sold to... Do we sell to a logger?
No, that was to a mill.
We sold to a mill directly.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. So yeah, I mean that's the it, and so I'll back up. So we had you out, right? We walked it, and I again not knowing really what you need to look at, I was like, okay, well I know there's good white oak up here, I know there's stuff here, and so I don't know. We spent 2 hours probably at least walking the property.
Yeah, something like that.
And so you know, I won't hold you to it, but we were probably halfway through it or most of the way through it, where you at least seem to exude some confidence of like, hey, this is good timber.
These
like,
are white oaks.
yeah, because here I am.
From the way
You're not wrong. I've seen white oaks before, and this is one of them.
So I mean, but we're because not that I like thought I was crazy, but I mean, you know,
you always wonder.
Yeah, well, I mean, I go out there and you know, when I say like, hey, yeah, you know, there's a bunch of like mid-20s and high 20 white oaks out there, you know, and a Ben or a Jed who does this for a living is like, okay. Like,
well, see, you know, but we get calls so many times where it's like, I have this or I have that. And dude, you have no idea the amount of times you come out and it's like just crap.
yeah.
I mean, just unbelievable.
Good sized trees that are crap?
Or
is it they're small trees?
Yeah, I was going to say
Both.
misidentification. Both. Yeah.
Yep.
So look, I would think white oaks of, you know, all the, you know, species that are worth harvesting would be one of the easier to tell, right? Like easier than like I would say walnuts would be tough for me. Like I'm not real sure what I'm looking for. Like tall, straight, wide.
Right. I mean, I would tell, you know, most guys you're ultimately looking at diameter, and once you like, you know, then you have it's
girth.
You know, 36 inches around. It's like, well, no, that's not diameter. And you're looking
Yeah.
at diameter at chest high.
Yep.
You know, once you're talking. So, you know, there's a lot of companies, you know, that'll go down to, you know, a point of cut type harvest. You know, they'll go down to 18 inches, and that's where they're measuring is at the bottom, at the stump where they're cutting. And then you have, you know, 18 inches chest high DBH. And so, you know, I like to see, you know, mature woods is like where, you know, for example, on this one here, we didn't go below 18 inches unless it had a major
At
defect.
DBH?
At DBH. Yep. And so...
So we've got a lot of 14, 15, 16-inch white oak that will remain, unless, you know, we talked about crowding and stuff, but will remain there for future harvest.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of timber left on that piece.
As a part of like when you're marking trees, knowing like Jeremy's goal, and I realize maybe this is above and beyond.
No, this is a good part to talk about.
Would you, are you willing to, did you mark other, like even though they're small, like bad trees to cut? Like, is that something that could be done?
Yeah, so we went in, we took out in the back, there's quite a bit of beech. So I marked a good bit of beech back in there.
Son of a beech.
Yeah,
Son
exactly.
of a beech.
Trying to get some of that stuff out of there. And you know, you're more aggressive on your species like that. When I'm talking about that diameter, you're more so looking at specifically your higher end stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
Gotcha.
That makes sense. And the other thing, we mentioned it briefly, is, again, I'm looking at this from an investment side, but also from a deer hunting side. And so when I bought this, the one thing that jumps out is there's, you know, 3 or 4 sections of red pine that are like, you know.
You say red pine.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with white pine. How's it different?
I mean, they're just...
Similar
It's
looking?
going to be difficult to describe, yeah. I mean...
Similar, though?
Yeah, very similar, yeah. They're small.
Thin and tall.
Yep.
Thin and tall type.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it's these essentially a couple of hillsides, but also these like benches, and they're like a biological desert underneath, right? Because there's no
there's
sunlight
there.
coming through there. And so we walked a little bit of it, but we talked about it, and I said, hey, you know, here's one was about 4 acres, and the other 2 are about 2 acres. I said, I'd love these to just be clear cut, like just nasty bedding, clear cut them.
Yeah.
Now the question came up of like, you know, is there a market for the red pine?
Yeah, so I talked to a few guys, and like it kind of came down to, I don't know that anybody actually put any kind of money on them.
Yeah.
The ones that bought it ended up with a high bid. I asked them, they're like, they didn't put anything on those things. They're basically, you know, they didn't figure any.
So again,
there's just nothing in there.
Leveraging kind of the better
Yep.
quality timber to get
Yep.
them to do something that I wanted done, and they're not going to really make any. In fact, they'll probably lose money on it because they got to pay guys to cut it.
Yeah, and they did take that into consideration. All these guys that I talked to, you know, they looked at the amount of extra work that there's going to be. That's something they have to factor in. But ultimately, you know, you need to be looking at what your goals are, and if you can utilize a company like this to do it, why not?
I don't want to go in there and clear cut 4 acres.
The cost of doing that, you know, if you wouldn't do that, you know, it wouldn't have made sense.
Yeah.
How big of an ask is that? If you're like looking at your place, like we know we have like some timber, it's worth a squeeze. How big of an ask for me to say, hey, I really would like a road here? Like what's the extent that you can ask? Like I know they're not excavators necessarily,
Right.
but like.
No, I mean, it depends how extreme of a road you're talking. If you're talking where you can drive, an F450 dually up over the hill, that might be different than putting an access path that you can get a side-by-side up through. That can be done very quickly, and most crews have no problem with that. In fact, they won't even charge any extra to do that.
So, for instance, on your property, what do you ask? What are you requesting that's done? Cut out these couple.
Cut
acres
out
of red
these
oak.
three places of red pine to where they're going to be. Those are my bedding areas, right? And then have a perimeter road put in.
Yep.
The whole property.
Yep. Yeah,
Cool.
with some compromise to where there's like a cliff line on one side,
right.
like you can't go
Level
over the cliff line. yeah. I want to go around it.
I had guys call me are like, we're not supposed to go down over that cliff with the road, are we? Because like that, they acted like that would be a deal breaker.
I mean,
almost.
it does go down. But I mean, for me, there was previous to there's no access around the property, right? I mean, I have entry points in the front, which is nice. It's coming from the east from a prevailing wind, but to get to the back of the property, I'd have to go through woods to the back of the property.
You couldn't have. There's no way.
Yeah. So, it just doesn't. So now I'm going to have this perimeter road put in, which was a condition that Madison and I talked about when we were preparing the bid, which we'll talk about.
So that's reasonable, depending on the size and how much.
And I mean, I've seen all the way up to, way back when I was working on a crew, we had done probably a 3-acre that we and it was a lot of this real small pine, and instead of cutting it, we had gone through and cut anything out that was worth, timber value, and then we went in with the dozer and uprooted everything and like graded it to where it was a food plot.
Wow.
Now that was, from the crew perspective, I mean, that's
a lot of work.
That sucked. I mean, that was.
Do you bring in like a mulcher?
We didn't on that. No, we just used a lot of the stumps were small enough. We could dig them out with the dozer, and then you just kind of graded everything. And then he had a big ravine that he had to push stuff into. But, like, that's a pretty big, that's going to take off your
Well, and there are some little
timber.
things. Like, we talked about that, like, small kill plot on that back part of the property where instead of asking those guys to do anything different, you just, I think, mark some areas harder.
Yeah, there was a real small section there, and then in that area. And that's another thing. It's kind of a weird, you would think... And from, ideally, there wouldn't be any timber where you want a food plot. But if there is timber there, it's almost better to have actual good timber there versus your pine, which is kind of a weird thing because, it's maybe more difficult to get the stumps out, but depending how big of a food plot you're wanting to do, if there's no timber value there, then you're going to have to cut everything and, deal with all that stuff versus, the tree's going to be gone. All you're going to be left with is some stumps.
Well, and if anybody's ever done it, and I have, trying to clear a 1/4 acre, of trees and stuff with, even a tractor and a chainsaw, dude, it's a lot of freaking work.
Yep.
A lot of work.
Takes longer than you think.
So these are the things that we kind of talked about as we had finished walking this of hey, what else do we want here? Knowing that, the goal, again, is income and how do I make this a better deer hunting property? Because the big part of the property, in the backside and stuff it's just a giant valley of big hardwood. Yeah. I mean, from a browse standpoint, from a bedding standpoint, there's not anything there. Sure, there were oaks and acorns, but there's nothing there from a actual food habitat year-round standpoint.
Yep.
Which is a huge thing for me of number one, I can't even get back there anyways. But if I'm not going to be able to get back there easily, at least make it where there's food and bedding and cover and thick so that the deer are there to pull up front. And again, not that I'll necessarily abuse the access road, but just the fact that I can easily get back there, makes a huge difference on that property itself.
And to be able to get in there with a UTV after you shoot something.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's the most important thing.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yep.
So, yeah, that was a big piece of it. But again, we kind of said, hey, I want to have these select cuts in here. We kind of knew that it would be, it was because it was the pine that it was going to be a little bit of a challenge on that. We just hoped that the rest of the stuff was attractive enough.
Yep.
And then the road. And those were, we made sure that those were in the bid that we put out so that when guys were taking it, hey, here are some conditions from me as the landowner.
And I assume there are some instances, if you're accessing a piece of the property that's not previously been accessed with equipment, if you get it across a creek or something, they've got the ability to put a culvert in or something. They'll do that.
Oh, yeah, that's child's play.
Yeah.
That's not a problem at all. I mean, you'd be amazed at some of the stuff they can get through.
Yeah. Man, the right equipment for the job like just makes such a big difference.
Yeah.
I know, like you were saying, we've tinkered with, you know, we take our UTVs and our winches out there. And and it's like, so we spent like 2 days doing something that like a dozer could have done in like 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I mean, this type of project is, you know, kind of why I started doing what I was doing. I mean, I'm passionate about the deer hunting side and the habitat aspect of it. And, you know, but there's not a lot of foresters, or, you know, I haven't ran into a whole lot of guys that, you know, are willing to, you know, get a property set up the way it should be and are willing to get some of this stuff done, you know, because I can see it from the hunting perspective, how much of a difference that's going to make. And, you know, so, you know, having, you know, I got a guy that we did over in Woodsfield, Ohio. And, you know, on the same thing there, he had, you know, a section of pines that we had. That was part of the conditions to go in and clear cut that out, and some of the access trails and where some of these roads are getting put in. You know, that's pretty standard. So
I was looking, and we'll get into the details of it later. But in terms of the pine for those clear cuts, that made up almost 6% of the total board feet being removed. So it's a lot of pine coming off of there.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's not even the ones that I didn't feel were big enough to.
Right.
Yeah.
Why would you even account for like board footage if it's just being?
I mean,
well, that was for, you know, when I send out that bid sheet, I want them to realize that there's that.
What do they do
there.
with it? Would they just shred it?
Well, I don't know. Some of that stuff can be sawed. There was just not enough margin in there for them to really put any kind of money on to pay for it. So if they're getting that, you know, in their mind, they're getting that for next to nothing.
Yeah.
You know, they're going to be able to get a little bit out of it.
Is there a use for it? Like, any idea what that would?
To be honest, I'm not sure with that type of stuff what it would be made into. A lot of that would
not
end
firewood,
up being
right? That's
pallet
pine's
wood.
no good.
Pallet wood.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk about
Ended up in your arts and crafts project.
Yeah, probably. I want to talk about the margin aspect when we get through this. But so you and I finished our kind of conversation. I think you put a proposal together for me. Talk about what that included, right? Because again, most people listen to this are novice, including myself. I was like, okay, I'm going to pay Madison 10% to like go out and sell this stuff. But you actually continue to kind of watch over this project.
Yeah. So we have a contract between myself and the owner, and that is essentially a timber management contract. And then we have a contract between the ultimate buyer and you guys.
Yeah.
But when we, went in there after we had that conversation, looked at everything and got the go ahead, went in and began marking timber. That's another big part of it is making sure your timber gets marked. It's very important.
Versus what was your marks? Like, how did you mark stuff on your side for what was to be cut?
You're saying what was it?
Blue slash?
Yeah, blue slash. Yeah, on both sides of the tree. That way they, you can see it on the bottom or uphill side. And then again, down at the stump, also putting another dot down there. That way after the harvest is complete, if you're coming across a bunch of stumps that don't have dots, there's a problem.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And so, then I went through, did the cruise, marked everything. That took 3 or 4 days, something like that. And then went in and, got all the totals for different, species, board feet, percentages, and then, all the conditions of the sale.
And are you actually, and I don't mean this like in a way, are you actually like trying to estimate that on every tree you mark, or are you taking like extrapolations in some?
No, that's every single tree.
You're literally taking every tree. Census basically of every tree. That's crazy.
Now, when I do the tax basis, that's different there.
Yeah.
But when we're actually doing the timber, every single tree gets marked. That's,
and I
scale each tree.
You marked the clear cut a little different, right?
Right. So the clear cut sections I went in, and what I felt was usable as far as diameter goes. I did add those in and mark those. But then I went in, and on that, so a clear cut to actually cut every single tree in that zone by hand is going to be hard to get somebody to do that.
Sure.
So, I said, hey, depending on the company, if they're not going to cut it by hand, some of these guys have shears where they could do it with equipment.
Yep.
But most of the guys that we deal with are cutting by hand.
Okay.
So what we did on that, then I went in and I made X's on the trees that they had to cut down at a minimum. So, the ones with the marks are going to be big enough, they're probably going to take out and use as lumber. And at a minimum, they have to cut the other ones down that I put an X on. And I, marked that extremely heavy in there to where you're essentially creating a clear cut.
I gotcha. Cool.
Makes sense?
Yep.
How do you do the whatever the census, or like when you're actually accounting for the board foot, like how do you do that?
Yeah, so it helps when you already have the timber marked. So now I have a basis of all that timber there, and then I go in and do basically plot samples or sample plots throughout the farm then. You know, and I'll have 1 acre plots throughout the farm.
Forgive me, not for the timber basis, but like when you're actually saying, okay, I came up with 300,000 board feet, you go out and just measure every tree and then account for how high it is.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and so a lot of the height, you know, that comes with just experience being able to estimate that. But you know, I've had some where I was, after everything was said and done, and you know, being on this is back when I was buying timber, being able to see on the other end what they would actually harvest, you know, within 1,000 feet sometimes.
I was going to ask, I mean,
it's like scoring a deer down to the end.
Do you see a report at the end, or I mean, is it just kind of
not in this scenario? That's
that would be okay.
Yep.
Yeah,
and
just,
we can get into
curious.
all that when we talk about the margins and stuff.
Sure.
So yeah, then we went through, marked everything, and then I sent the bid out to, I think, 10 or 12 guys, something like that.
Can I ask this? This might be proprietary. How do you send the bid out?
Usually email.
Okay.
I mean,
just
that's
direct contact. It's not like there's a platform that the mills
not
are
necessarily,
watching.
no.
Okay.
Nope.
A bulletin
I mean,
board.
some guys. So actually, you know, so different states are a little bit different. Indiana has a really cool program where they do have that, where you can put this up and have, you know, registered guys bid on that.
Facebook for loggers.
Essentially, yeah.
Interesting.
And they have, you know, we can get all of this, but like I feel like they have a much better system in place to prevent guys from getting taken advantage of, rather than Ohio. There's very little regulation in Ohio.
Interesting. So I was going to bring per the bid. So and again, obviously estimates here, right? We had 970 total trees included in this harvest, which was just over 300,000 board feet. The number one species was white oak at about 24%, or 73,000 board feet. So that was our question we had the other day of like, okay, it's 300,000. Well, 73,000 of that was white oak.
White oak. Are there any states where the timber is auctioned, like to mills? Like, is there like, so in the same sense we're talking about a public platform? Like, is there a scenario where it's like it's actively being bidded on?
Not that I'm aware of. Cool idea.
We could come up with that.
Yeah.
Do you think that would be a good thing or a bad thing?
So long as you could regulate the type of guys that are able to bid on it, and you know there's checks and balances that for sure they're going to be doing good work. You know, that
you could probably set it up just like a land transaction where it has to still be approved by your forestry consultant,
right?
The landowner and the forestry consultant say, yeah, that's a good crew, or it's not.
And it kind of comes back to then, you know, there's some mills
or qualify your bidders up front,
right? Yeah, exactly. But it comes back to the tight knit community that most of these mills are. You know, if they, you know, for example, if they decide, you know, if a bunch of guys decide they don't want to work with me, you know, I could be essentially out of business. So, I mean, it's, you know, some guys, they'll essentially just boycott something they don't like.
Wow.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So it's kind of a weird, it is a weird thing. But, you know, from what I've seen so far, the best route is either for the landowner to bid it out themselves or have a forestry consultant come in.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so white oak 24, and beyond the 2 black walnuts that you have on here, I assume white oak is
two.
Yeah. White oak.
You're walnut deficient.
Yeah, walnut deficient.
Oh, there's actually you actually have a fair amount of walnut
in that front hillside there.
Well, I mean, even scattered throughout, and then across the creek down in there.
Yeah.
But a lot of that stuff, for one, right now the market on the lower grade walnut, it's down, and they were pretty small, so I felt it was better to leave that for the next.
Son of a bitch, I got walnuts. I'm not deficient.
Well, they're still deficient.
Yeah, I mean, comparatively, there's not a whole lot there, but yeah.
So, but beyond that, white oak, the most valuable species we've got on the list, right?
Yep.
Okay. So 24% on that side.
Can I ask this?
Sure.
Does a chestnut oak qualify as like a white oak?
I was going to say that's separate here. That was 8.7% or 26,000 board feet in chestnut oak.
So yes, that is a white oak, but you know, they're, because of the grain, they can't be used for stave, and they don't believe they can be veneered either. And so you're looking at strictly a saw log.
I've got some good chestnut oaks.
Oh yeah. Yep. They're nice trees, and they grow, you know, pretty quick, and pretty produce a lot of acorns too.
Let me ask you this. I know I'm deviating. Sorry.
No?
Do you think deer like chestnut oak acorns?
That's a
Because
good
I've heard
question.
both. I've heard some say they don't eat them.
Yo, who was it? Bo? Bo said it's like the Sheets hot dog of the woods.
Either him or
That's what I think that's
him
what
or
he called
Steve.
it.
Yeah.
So one of the properties that I grew up hunting down
was that.
southeastern Ohio had a ton of chestnut oaks. And I felt the deer hit them, but kind of like a red oak, it would be later on in the year.
Okay.
They definitely preferred the true white oaks, like early.
Yeah. Well, they drop at slightly different times. Like the white oaks are dropping in September.
Yep.
And I don't know exactly when a chestnut
I'm not
oak
sure
is.
either. I think they are a little bit later, but
Yeah, not much though, because I mean, I see chestnut oaks drop pretty early, so maybe even before season.
Yeah, they're early too.
Yeah, September, late September.
So they can't be used for veneer logs or stave logs. They're not to
Right.
the same quality
Yeah.
as a true white oak.
Yep. So then they're basically just, your general saw logs, which still being in the white oak family brings decent money. So.
Why is that? I mean, what's the difference?
I believe a lot of it has to do with the porousness of the grain. So it's a lot more, I guess that's the right word, a little more open grain
Yeah,
versus the white oak or tight grain.
tight grain.
Interesting.
Yep.
So like in the exam, and I know market varies, but like where are we on like a white oak pricing?
Yeah.
Right now?
So, down in that area, and these guys are not breaking it down for me what they
Sure.
put on each species.
Right.
But, something like that in that area, I figure probably brought around $1 or a little more a foot straight through.
Okay.
If you were 50 miles north, that could have brought, $1.50
Wow.
or more, $1.75.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's a big. I
Yep.
mean, that's 75,000 board feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
it's
crazy.
it's a big difference. Yeah.
Wow.
To be honest, like if this piece was further north and we'll get into, like what type of costs they'll probably have
Sure.
on a project like this, it would have brought a lot more money.
And that's purely because of proximity to the mills.
Yeah.
Zero difference in quality of timber.
Right.
Wow.
Yep.
Crazy, isn't it?
I figured it up.
Somebody
I
needs
think
to start a mill down there, dude.
I figured it up. I think they'll probably have between 60 and 70,000 worth of trucking costs.
Trucking. Wow.
Wouldn't and again, what about like a West Virginia mill? Like, why wouldn't they bid on it?
So down that area, and so my dad actually bought a property down in West Virginia, and guys down in that area, same thing. There's not a lot of guys down there, so the guys that are doing it, they're buying stuff for next to nothing.
They're cheap.
They
Just like the land.
they were trying to buy timber straight through for 20 cents a foot.
Holy cow.
And
This is good stuff for people to know
Oh, yeah.
because we keep
Yep.
talking about buying in other. We want to buy in other states.
Yeah.
I obviously own a kid. I had no idea the variation. Again, look at like you said, 50 miles north of where I'm at, and I could be bringing 50% increase in my money.
well, as much as it is, proximity, it's also competition.
Sure.
So, for the guys down there, there's nobody else, there's not nearly the amount of competition, so there's no reason to pay more than what you need to. And they're able to buy it for really cheap down there.
Nuts, man. Yeah,
And obviously, the further north you come, there's parts like Pittsburgh area, there's good timber down in there yet that, you can get, pretty close to the same amount as what you would, in Ohio there. So, but again, that just comes down to proximity.
just a good note for people listening when they're thinking about either their timber or buying somewhere. Like if you're going in from a timber aspect, like this is, and again, I had no idea, right? All I knew was like, I don't know. I mean, if there's good timber, like somebody will come log it. But no idea the factors of the cost involved to getting that to the mill and things like that.
Sorry, I know I keep deviating. You keep pop questions. I have so many questions. When you go out and you say, "Hey, there's $100,000 worth of timber here," and you're talking to a landowner, are you speaking in terms of like that's what you'll get out of it, or is that generally how it's done, or because the landowner
That's kind of how we talked about it.
Never gets
that's
100%.
when I'm talking about $100,000, I'm saying that's what you're going to be getting out of this timber.
Yeah.
Because there's a difference between, what the mills are getting out of that timber than when it gets to their mill. So, for some of these logs, for example, they might be getting, $220, the veneer logs, it might be $3-4.
And they're buying it for me at $1 to $2.
Right. But then, you're looking at, you know, you have to figure all your overhead until it all gets back. So,
and you're operating to give him that number off of, what is it, a 50-50 split, a 40-60?
That's a good question. It kind of comes down to most guys are trying to buy in that 50-50, 60-40 window, in that range. I think, you know, the higher end timber, the more is going to go to the landowner because, you know, you don't have to have as much there. There's more money to be working with.
Yeah.
And transparently, when Madison walked that with me, even before he did his cruise, he gave me a range of which our final number was damn close to the upper range of that. So just in terms of like, for me as a landowner, knowing what I'm even getting into.
And so to give is an appraisal, a timber appraisal
that
you give up front?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty
report.
rough.
I asked him. I said, hey, what do you think ballpark here? Like, where are we even at here?
Yeah, so basically
and you typically would do that, though, right? You'd say, here's what I think we got.
Yeah, so when I first, you know, walked at the very first day, I mean, I didn't want him signing a contract with me and then, you know, not telling him that it ends up being 20 grand. Obviously, that wasn't going to happen. But, you know, I want my landowner to at least have a, you know, like, hey, I think, you know, without cruising this, without actually taking a lot of time, there's probably close to this amount.
You gave me a comp, actually, because you thought, I think we said that there was 250,000 board feet, so 250,000. So we ended up higher than that.
Ended up being a little bit
and
more.
And I don't remember who it was, but you had a cut recently that just got bid on, accepted. And so he gave me a comp, which he's like, well, this one had maybe not as good a timber. I think it may have been closer to a mill or something. And this is what they got.
Right.
And that's like, oh, I can do the math at that point.
Yep.
Cool.
And then once, you know, I actually had the full breakdown, full footage, and actually could see what was, you know, then you can start running some rough numbers, and I could get pretty close. And we were right
based
there.
on market values, right?
Yeah.
Like you're looking at
So
what I'm seeing. What I wasn't sure on this one was how much that mileage was going to affect things.
That was
and
the
it
big.
honestly did a little bit more than I thought it might.
Yeah.
I was hoping. So when you have these timber sales, like the way we're doing them, I've seen so many times mills, because, you know, it's a confidential bid. They don't know what the next guy's going to bid as much as they might try to squeeze it out of people. They ultimately have to put on what they think they can buy it at. And sometimes if they need that timber bad enough or want it bad enough, they'll overpay for it. And I just recently heard of a sale where the one guy left $100,000 laying on the table.
Oof.
Yeah. I mean, that was a huge piece.
Laying on the table?
Meaning, you know, he was $100,000 more than the next highest bid.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because it's sealed
that's
bids.
what happens with like a highest and best, you know, approach.
Yeah, how bad do you want it and how bad do you need it type of thing.
Yeah, and I had on a very, very
I do hate that approach from a buyer perspective.
Yeah,
it's like, I don't know. What's the other guy?
Yeah.
It is frustrating. But on much smaller scale, I had a piece in Columbus, and, you know, that one, you know, that guy, that was just under 40,000 board feet, like a pretty small job. And he left $15,000, which, like, considering the scale of that job, is a lot.
That's a lot of money. So just for people listening, because obviously I think most people, common sense wise, know, you know, walnut, white oak, valuable timber, good pieces. But when we get into, you know, red oak, black oak, you know, let's just stay in the oak family. Red oak, black oak, chestnut oak. I mean, are we still talking like north of 70 cents, north of 50 cents? Like what?
No, you're
really?
talking a lot of that stuff. Most guys, I mean, it varies. So if you have really high end poplar, red oak, that, you know, a good mix, some maple mixed in there. I had a piece that was exclusively that, and that brought 55 cents.
Wow.
But a lot of guys, if it's not really premium stuff, you know, they're trying to buy it for 35 to 40 cents or less.
I think that's a huge piece, because that was, you know, again, they didn't give us the actual breakdown, but I was trying to do the numbers in my head, and I'm like, man, you think, but I had a guy, I was one of those stave guys. He came and looked at my Kentucky place, and I have this giant red oak in the middle. I mean, monster tree.
Yep.
And I was like, just curious, like, how much you cut down that tree for it? He'd be like, I'll give you $200 for it. I'm like, what? Like, it's a 100-year-old tree. Like, there's no way in hell $200 I'd let you cut it down. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. But I think people, and I mean, I'm guilty of it. I go and look at a property, I'm like, damn, that's good red oak. Like, there's not much value.
You know, it comes in, they grow fast, you know, compared to, you know, some white oaks and stuff. And there often you'll have a lot more volume in your red oaks and stuff and your poplar. And so, you know, what doesn't amount to much as far as board feet, you look across the woods, it does add up, but it's still nothing like a white oak and walnut. Yeah.
So, I mean, if somebody's buying a property and they're walking it, if they're seeing good white oak and obviously good walnut, that's a good one.
Yeah.
But if you're just seeing
that's pretty much across the country, at least the Northeast and Midwest.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, I get calls, people are, you know, ask me to come down to Georgia and
you're
Texas
gonna get it,
and all over the place.
Not that we're like raving here, but you're going to get a bunch of calls probably from a bunch of areas.
And it's like, look, dude, I have no idea because the industries are so different. You know, and it's like, even West Virginia, Southern West Virginia.
Well, because you did a job in Michigan recently, right?
Mm-hmm.
And was that significantly different?
Yeah, and well, I mean, yes and no. So and I will say, you know, I've done some further jobs simply because I had some connections with mills and referrals and stuff. Yeah. I'm kind of dialing that back. I'm getting more and more work to the point that I feel it is ultimately better if you have a local guy. And it's tough because I get people, hey, do you know somebody in this area? I had another guy reach out, you know, do you know anybody Southeast Iowa?
Joe's probably annoyed with me calling him because I ask him all the time, like, hey, and he's like, no, I don't know. I
know. It's honestly like it would be a goal of mine to eventually build out a platform to where it's like, look, if you're in this area, reach out to this dude.
What a valuable network that would be for people, you know, especially in the way that we all communicate and look today. I mean,
well, there are networks of foresters, right? Like you can go on.
Yeah, like state associations. And stuff.
Yeah. So you can definitely go through, you know, state forestry stuff, but they are limited. So
transparently, I called 4 or 5 on the Ohio side before I got in touch with Madison, and obviously none of those other 4 or 5 worked.
Why didn't they work?
Too far. Most of them wouldn't come. Yeah. Yep, too far. One basically was more. I got more of the gist, and not a bad thing, but was like timber improvement, and at the time I was like, well, I need somebody to sell it. You know, I mean, improvement's great. Like I'd be all for hearing the recommendations, but I need somebody to sell this.
So I may be wrong on this. I don't think that a state forester can facilitate a commercial timber sale.
Oh, really?
I don't think. I might be wrong on that. Don't hold me to that, but I think that's how it is.
Interesting.
So if you're
they can give you a lot of recommendations on how to approach it. But again, most of that time they're going to be looking at it from a timber improvement standpoint rather than, you know, the hunting side of things.
Sure.
And, you know, while you can do some of that hand in hand, it's going to be a little bit different of an approach.
Yeah.
Dude, what did that guy quote me to come down and give us an opinion of value? Remember that? I was trying to find a forester in Greene County.
$20,000.
No, it was like maybe it was total, but it was like $1,000 an acre.
It's $1,000 an acre.
Holy crap!
Just to give
and
an
I was
opinion
like,
of value.
Are you kidding? Like,
wow.
He's like, no, that's what it is. I was like,
wow.
Okay, we're good, I guess.
Yeah, we're not gonna do that. Yeah,
that's insane.
Wild.
Wow.
So we submitted again, and in that bid, it also talked about, hey, he wants a perimeter road. Here's these areas of clear cuts. You submitted to whatever 10 or 12. We got 5 back.
Yep.
So we got 5 sealed bids back. And I thought it was funny because you were like, hey, when we get these bids back, whatever, it closes at 4 p.m. Like I'll call. It was like 4:02. You called me. I was like, what? And Rising had just been on the podcast that day because remember I said, hey, did you put your bid in yet? And he's like, I'm about to.
So you sent it out to 14, 15, but only 4 or 5 of them bid?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And I mean, it kind of came down to I sent, you know, a lot of the guys that I thought would, you know, be good as far as price, but I didn't know. You know, I talked to a few of them. It's like, man, it's just too far. It's just like it was just, even though it was really, really good timber, they just like, it's just too far for us.
Interesting.
Or maybe it's just not good timing for we're overloaded already. Or
it's that. I mean, that geography side is pretty mind blowing. Just to like, no idea. Yeah, no idea that.
How
that
can
distance.
you kind of like if somebody's looking to buy property and they want timber as like a potential return on their investment? Like, how can you figure that out? Like, where to look?
I mean, so I was thinking about that because I figured that's something you might ask.
Typical Jared.
Yeah.
Just get it out of my mind.
Typical.
Specifically Ohio, you can kind of almost think of it, you know, look at the interstate system.
I mean, I Googled mills after you talked about that, like in Illinois and in Kentucky, like where are these mills at? Now that I know, like that makes such a big difference. I just Googled.
All right, well, here's something for you. Why don't you just do that, make a map, and then draw a radius of like a reasonable driving distance, and then look at properties inside. Dude, we got to get on.
Well, but here's the thing, and I mean, you know, Ben saying it from a buyer's angle. I'm interested in your take from a consultant angle. Is the number of properties that he's seeing with timber similar to mine is like rapidly declining.
Yeah, very much. I mean, I mean, you know, looking at the type of quality of timber you had on that property, you know, that's some of the better timber, you know.
Well, when did you think that it was last cut? Ever?
Well, you know, I was thinking about that, and it's like, I mean, if it was, dude, it was a long time ago.
And it was a family farm. We'll get into the finance, but I mean, I bought that as a family farm that had been in the family for 45 years ish. Probably, you know, since the 70s.
I mean, I wouldn't be shocked at all if it was not cut in that amount of time.
Yeah, which sounds right.
Well, there definitely are people, just like we talked earlier about not shooting does. Like there are people that don't cut trees.
Yeah,
like, I don't want to cut.
Yep,
it's not to be cut.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, and it's you know, from a the timber side of things. I mean, I get it because like being a landowner myself, I get it. Like I got, for example, I got, a couple acres just behind my house. It's got some beautiful white oak and red oak down there. I mean, stuff like that's on yours. And I look at like what I could get out of that and me being able to look at those trees every day and it's like, there ain't no way.
Yeah.
I think that's like, it's kind of, and I totally get it, but then it's from, if you're looking at it from a hunting perspective and you saw it firsthand, that's not the best.
No.
A lot of people don't understand that.
No. I mean, in some places I do, but the majority of that property, I don't have any browse. I have very little browse, except for where the tornado came in off the top.
Well, I'm coming back to my senses, I guess you could say. But like for a while there, I was the opinion of like, why would you not leave any trees? Like deer don't need trees. Like, yeah, you can hunt from a tree, but you can also hunt from a box blind, and it's like deer live at this tall.
Yeah.
Ben's kind of talked me out of that.
Yeah, and I would agree with his approach. You want, it's good to have variety and you have a good mixture in your property. I'm really excited to see what's going to happen on yours when everything's said and done, 2 years down the road. But like I got a property right now that I'm hunting 55 acres. We cut that out 5 years ago, and that was back. I actually cut that myself. I was just subcontract at the time. And, they did an 18-inch point of cut harvest on that.
So that's down at the base?
Down at the stump, yep. Dude, it was next to a clear cut.
Wow.
Now, that property holds deer like you would not believe.
Sure.
That little 55 acres, I can probably I have most of the mature deer in 1,000 acre around me come through that property and utilize that property. But the difficult part is then a couple things. You don't have great access because you have deer bedding right up smack on your borders. I'm fortunate I have a really steep ravine running the entire property that I can slip in all the way to the back. But, without that, you'd be kind of screwed. And then, on top of that, you don't have any defined bedding. And it's also in some areas so thick that they avoid it. So, you have to be kind of careful with that. And I would definitely err on the side of cutting it harder than too light because I've seen that too. I've had a few calls of guys, I got my timber cut 3 years ago. And I come out there and it's like, they did a great job as far as if you looked at it simply from managing your timber over the next, 20, 30 years, being able to do light harvest. But from the hunting standpoint, it was too open. I mean, there wasn't any cover there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's fun in that fun approach because, like, obviously with mine and having those, select control clear cut areas, like those that is bedding. It's thick. Like, but overall, the amount of browse and things like that to create by opening up the canopy and removing some of these bigger trees and stuff, there's going to be a big benefit from that.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm biased, I think, towards because I've killed some good deer recently on really thick properties. Like the whole thing is bedding, and we just have two small food plots. One's got a tree stand on it, the other's got a box blind.
Okay.
And it's like the way that the deer use that is, I don't know, most of the year. Like in the summer, I don't put them in around. I don't have to.
Oh, dude, the deer aren't there.
Well, they're there.
Hardly, are they?
The does are at least.
Okay.
We don't monitor it enough to know.
Gotcha.
I assume they're there. I could be wrong.
I mean, I don't have any mature bucks on my property this time of year.
I would assume because it's so thick and they're in velvet, they would not want to be.
Well, I should say there's portions of the property that are usable and stuff.
Okay.
But basically, it's like the bucks know that the does eat in those food plots. So it's like they bed everywhere.
Yep.
It's like there's not a whole lot of there's no pinch points or anything to like hunt or a lot of there is terrain, but both the deer that I've killed, one popped out in the food plot because and he just knew does were there. there wasn't at the time. He was cruising through and I shot him. The other one followed a doe right into it, out of like the thick. And there's roads, right? So there's trails that we had the logger put in, and it's like seems hard to beat.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. I mean, on the property that I'm hunting right now, it is a permission piece. I will probably be buying it within a year or so, but so up to this point, this is the first year I can put food on it. And so I'm super excited to see how that changes the dynamic.
Sure.
But the interesting part was, even after all the ag around me was cut, I was still having deer staying on that 55 acres late season. I found a lot of sheds on that property. Simply, I felt due to the browse.
I think we talked about, I don't remember, a couple weeks ago or a week ago in a podcast about, if you look at a deer's diet throughout the year, it varies, and acorns come in here, and forbs are here, and crops are here. But foundationally, it's browse. At any given time, it's 30 to 80% of a deer's diet.
Yep.
And at least for me, that was the first thing I recognized on that Ohio place is I've got a couple areas that one's an old overgrown pasture, one's where this tornado came through. There's browse there, and there's always deer there, and there's bucks there. But the other 110 acres of the property, vacant. No browse.
Yeah.
I think it's like it's situational. Like, yeah, for sure. I mean, like a clear cut, obviously being the fully formed version of like of forbs and of browse. It's like it seems like it's either that or like in our area, if there is a crop field left standing, or like this year I planted 12 acres of beans.
Nice.
We'll obviously pull in deer from everywhere.
Oh yeah.
But there probably still are some deer that just won't have knowledge of my bean field, or and they'll also probably migrate out of areas they're spending time into a clear cut, if not another ag field or something that's left.
Right. Yep. Yeah, exactly.
All right, so we got 5 bids back. You opened them up, reviewed them, like the moment. Hey, yep, doors closed. Here's what they are, and they were all within, what, 20 grand of each other, probably?
Yeah, to be honest, that was a pretty tight one.
Yeah.
Like oftentimes you'll get some that are way low and some that are, way on the upper end. And this was a pretty tight one. To be honest, I was, the guy that ended up getting it, he texted me later and he was just like, he was $60 less than the runner-up originally, and he was almost going to send that bid in. And last minute, he was just like, the more he thought about it, he's like, no, I want this piece. He put a little bit more on. That's what bought it.
There you go. Yeah, it was good. So, people listening to this know that Jared and I are pretty transparent. So, that bid we accepted was a little over $143,000. So that's what we pulled in on that property for $300,000.
You said we.
Wait.
I don't think I'm going to see any of that.
Madison and I.
we.
So 143,000 is what we're getting off of that. And Jared was kind of talking about it pre-podcast, but we signed that sometime here in beginning of June. So they have 1 year, right, to make that cut.
Yep.
And we kind of speculated, but 8-10 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it can vary so much because it's so weather dependent. You get some bad weather and it can push a project out way longer than it should. But I had a project over that piece in Woodsfield. I figured that would take quite several months, and in like 4 weeks they're going to be done.
Yeah, and I did see, so the timber contract that I made as the landowner with the timber company that bought it, there was an option there essentially for me to say, hey, don't cut this during hunting season. It may make sense to a lot of people. I kind of, and we said it in the bid, we kind of left it open thinking like, hey, no restrictions, try to bring in as much. This is the investment side of it as much as the hunting side, right? No restrictions, try to bring in as much money as we can by being flexible.
Yeah, and that kind of comes down to, it depends on, for you have multiple properties you can hunt.
Sure.
It's not a huge deal if you're not able to hunt it while they're, say they're cutting that.
I'll go shoot one of
other
Jared's
guys,
deer. Yeah.
exactly.
They cut one of our properties. Like the whole property was not that
last year, right? I think it was last year.
Yeah.
How was that? Did that kind of screw it up, or how was that? Did they kind of move back in?
Honestly, I kind of stayed away from it.
Okay.
You had deer in right after they were done.
In and around. Yeah.
In and around.
Yeah, I mean, there was always deer there, and I'm sure they filtered right in. As soon as the crew moves through, it's like now there's fresh food and stuff there.
Yeah.
But yeah, we didn't hunt it a whole lot.
But, you know, a lot of guys, you know, they got one property. This is all they hunt.
Sure,
and,
I get
you know,
it.
they don't want to sacrifice that window. And so, you know, we can block off October, November, however you want to do that. But, you know, if we're going to do that, I usually push for a 2-year contract just to give the guys more time. But you're also having to look at, you know, the timber market is not even as steady as the real estate market. You know, it's constantly up and down seemingly. And so, you know, they're looking at it from a timing perspective. You know, when they're from a buyer side, you want to be looking at it, you know, you're trying to, you don't have to worry about, if you get it under contract now, you don't have to worry what it's going to do in the future.
Sure.
You know, it might be higher, it might be lower. I know there's guys right now that bought timber back in, you know, 21.
What, it was
22.
through the roof.
That was just crazy. And well, the one mill I know is, you know, the last 9 months, every single load that they're hauling in, they're losing money on.
Oh,
Yeah. Like, it's bad.
wow.
So, you know, that's kind of then their risk on that.
Sure.
So giving them more time gives it a little more flexibility, you know, for, you know, say if the market drops, gives them time to have that market come back, hopefully. But, you know, a typical, most standard is a year.
How long can they sit on it? Like if they're, you know, if they're like, I have a year contract to get it off this property, but the market's like they're losing money on every load, are there situations where they can take it back to the mill and just set on it until the market comes out?
Well, yes and no, not super long, because, you know, as soon as you cut that tree, it starts to die. And so you have, you know, you
Is that
do
how that
have
works?
Yeah, that is how that works. Yeah.
It's dead.
And so, you know, you do have limitations there, especially in the summertime. Your species, they start to stain, like your whiter colored woods.
Yeah.
They start to turn different colors, and that affects the value of them. Like your hard maples are really bad in the summertime. You know, some logs, they can sit on longer than others.
So I understand it obviously dies when you cut it.
Yeah.
But it's always cut from that point forward. Like,
Right.
So what stops the process of like whatever it is, dying, aging,
Um,
degrading?
That's a good question. You know, I
They
think a
treat
lot
it
of,
like lumber.
right. And I think a lot of that would also be, you know, they're just having this set out on a yard where the sun is beating down on it.
Yeah.
And you have the weather on it. So like a lot of the times you'll see if you drive by a mill this time of year, especially a bigger operation, they'll have sprinklers on them and they will just keep them soaked all the time.
Really?
Wow. And I'm not exactly sure how that, you know, but it basically helps with the coloring end of things. You don't have stain and stuff.
Just made me you've seen the show Swamp Loggers?
Clips of it, yeah.
What's the deal with that?
I have no
With
idea.
those big
It's not
cypress
realistic.
trees?
Yeah, they pull them out of they're soaked in water.
Yeah, big cypress trees that have been waterlogged forever and petrified. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how that works, but
Okay, never mind.
but there is a
Sounds like bullshit.
there is a certain amount of time to where, you know, you begin to, you know, lose the value of that tree. But it's not, you know, it's not as fast as what you mean. It's not like it's 2 weeks.
It's a lot
and
of
it's shot,
timing
you know.
planning there, though. I mean, so like obviously with that oscillating market, knowing you have a time, there is a clock. So hypothetically, what if they don't cut it in a year?
You're saying if they wouldn't get the timber harvested in a year?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's on their bad then. You know, I've
They're
seen,
done, right? I mean,
Yeah. Yep. They have to move. I mean, say they're halfway through and the contract runs out. You as a landowner can be gracious and extend
Sure.
that contract, or even for payment, extend that contract. But that's a problem.
does that happen often?
It does happen. Most guys, you know, are going to be understanding and work with you.
Sure.
I haven't ran into a whole lot of issues with that, you know, in all the years that I've been doing it. But at the same time, I mean, I've seen it happens so rarely that's an issue. It kind of comes down to, look, the timber contract's up, and if I paid too much for it, it's just going to be a loss. Just how
Yeah,
it
so
is.
I got to cut it regardless.
Yep.
And the other thing worth mentioning is, so accepted this bid. Upon signing the contract with the timber company, I got paid 25% right away. So I've got my check right away. No equipment, no trees have been taken off the property. I paid Madison his 10% out of that, right? And then the moment they put a piece of equipment on the property, I get the balance. Before,
Yep.
I get a balance. So
the balance,
before, I had no idea, right? Again, going back, before they even cut a single tree, I'm paid in full per the contract, which
By who?
the timber company.
They write you a check.
Yep.
For 25%, and then
Already
whenever
did.
they come and put their stuff on, they just
Before they put it on, they
I
pay
usually
me.
have them send it out beforehand, or at the very least on the day they move in. You know, if say you're there when they move in,
Here's
hand you
your
a check.
75%
It's
check.
So they write a check to you, and you write a check to you.
And
I
he
did.
writes a check to me, yeah.
Yep.
Who's writing a check to
Yeah,
me?
Exactly.
You don't get one. Yeah. And then the 75% balance, again, the day they move in, I get that. And so before they cut anything, I'm whole. I'm paid.
Yep.
I'm paid up. Which, to your point, I mean, depending on what your goals are, right? Let's say they are going to cut during hunting season. You have money if you want to go buy another farm.
There you go. Yeah.
Or lease or do whatever you need. So, okay. So I guess going from there, let's dive just from a time standpoint. Let's dive a little bit into the margin aspect of things.
Okay.
Because I think that's one where, you know, if we're looking at it, and really from a landowner side, you know, we really only need to be concerned of whatever the hell we're going to get out of it. What are we getting paid? But I think out of the interest of just knowing, you know, what are these guys looking at in margin, knowing what the transportation costs and all the overhead. And I didn't know, but, you know, most of these people cutting, you know, are subcontracted by the mill. So the mill, out of what they are then making, are also paying to get it cut.
Yeah. Yeah. So very rarely do you have a mill that owns their own equipment and has their own employees working for them. There are times that they'll have their own equipment, but what ends up happening is if you have somebody, you know, subcontract that's operating your equipment, they're not going to take care of it.
They're going to beat it up.
So it just works better. You have a better crew typically because they're running their own business too. If they start trashing properties, that mill is going to boot them.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it kind of creates a little bit of checks and balances just so that you have better quality overall. So you typically have a subcontract crew that provides, in our area, it's pretty common to have a skidder, a dozer, and a knuckle boom loader to load the trucks then. And so they provide all the equipment, and, you know, there's most of the time 2-3-man crew.
That's mind-blowing that it's hand sawed.
Yep, all hand cut.
That's crazy.
How would you think it'd be sawed?
The machine.
Slashers and stuff.
Slasher.
Yeah. Where do they use those? That's like pine trees down south, right?
Yeah, and a lot of that
Softer
stuff,
wood, I guess.
Right. Well, and then it's also the diameter plays in there because, like,
to
some
grab
of that stuff, dude, is so big that to be
Can't
able
get
to
your hands around.
Yeah, well, girth again. Full circle.
Yeah, we're real mature at this
comes around
podcast. If
goes
you
around.
haven't picked that up,
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, a giant white oak trying to manhandle that is not going to be easy.
Yeah, exactly. So it's, you know, then it'll all cut. And most crews, you know, it ranges quite a bit, you hear, but it's, you know, they're all around that $150 to $200 per 1,000 board feet. So they get paid based off of production.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yep. So they want to be efficient.
Exactly. Yep. So the faster this gets done for them, the more they get paid in a year's time. And most crews, like I'd said earlier, you know, you'd have some smaller crews that'll move only 1 million feet, but most guys are moving between 1.5 and 2 to 2.5 million feet.
Where are these crews? Are they staying locally to when they? Because I mean, you're going to be there for 8 to 10 weeks. Like, are they driving home every day, or like how?
It depends. I mean, most jobs are close enough. Everybody's driving home. I mean,
Right.
I don't know down there. You know, I don't know. Will they, you know, do some stay away? I don't know how that is. We always, as you know, when I was working on the crew, I was just like, I hated stay away. So
Yeah,
I
you
would
wanted
rather
to come
drive it,
home.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
And then you have your trucking aspect, like I said, and that ranges primarily off of distance on your cost on that, and something like this between $700 and $900 a load. So
That's crazy. I mean, there's your cost. It
Adds
gets
up.
eaten up.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when you're looking at buying it on a 60-40 or a 50-50 basis, there's not much left over. And so, you know, I think a lot of people have in their head, you know, these mills are just making a killing. And,
Sure.
you know, there are stories out there that happening, but it's oftentimes on guys being taken advantage of and bought undervalue of what it was actually worth.
Gotcha.
And the other thing, too, if you're doing a strictly diameter cut where they're doing it off of the stump, you often will get a lot of overcut there. So when they're estimating it and you don't have every single tree scaled, a mill is not going to overestimate what they think is in that woods. They're going to keep themselves safe. And so when they do that, you know, you're going to have a percentage of overcut there that it's just pure profit then.
So like if they purchased, in my case, 300,000 board feet, but they end up cutting, I don't know, 320.
Right. Yep.
So they've got that 20,000 extra
exactly.
is pure profit.
Yep.
Okay.
And I mean, I've heard of,
and that's not necessarily, they're not cutting trees not marked. They're just
exactly.
It's the variation.
And you know, when I go through and scale, this is my opinion of board feet and what's there.
Because I mean,
I
know
ultimately it is up to them then to go through and verify that information. And so, you know, it is up to them. If it would cut less than what I think it is going to cut,
that's
not on me. That is on them ultimately. Or if it overcuts, you know, that's if they think, hey, I think there's actually a little bit more. But, you know, obviously I'm trying to be as accurate as possible. So.
And so I assume that also, again, comes back to your reputation, because you don't want these guys to constantly be getting shorted. You also don't want the rumor mill of like, Madison's always constantly shorting the land.
Exactly.
So you got to find that happy medium of accuracy.
As much as you can beat that on, that's best.
Got it. Cool.
And I've heard of extreme examples, I mean, where it cut double.
Wow.
And like that's happened. And then, you know, that is up to the mill. You know, the landowner has signed a contract. They've agreed to this price, and it's up to the mill then. You know, I mean, I have heard of guys coming back and paying them more, but
yeah, I mean, at that point,
not a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you signed a contract, you accepted it.
And that's where it comes. It's so important to be marking your timber.
Yeah. So, you know, a couple questions on my side, just because I think it's good to know. So, obviously, you know, we did basically the 18-inch at DBH. You know, we've got those select cuts in there. What is a typical time frame for, you know, a set of woods that looks like mine before it's able to have, and again, maybe not, obviously not as big of a select cut, but another cut on it?
Something like this. So, you know, I feel like it kind of comes down to the structure of the woods. So every woods is going to be a little bit different. Something like this, you know, you're probably looking at that 10, 15-year range. I would say we did, like, considering the structure of your property, we did an aggressive selective harvest.
Yeah.
And that's going to promote more regeneration. If I was looking at strictly as, you know, managing for timber over the long term, just like Ben said, you'd be looking at 150,000 board feet versus 300.
Right. So that 5 or 7 years from now, you can come back in for another cut.
Right. Yeah. And then you can be on that rotation almost indefinitely.
Yeah. Whereas with this one, and, you know, number one, I wanted to make it better for deer hunting. Number two is it's an investment property. So I don't know, 3-4 years from now, I may sell it. You know, I don't know. And on that note, I think important to talk about the tax basis, right? Because this is the key to it. Because, you know, everybody knows in terms of, you know, whether you sell property for more than you bought it for or whatever, you know, Uncle Sam on the capital gain side is out there to gouge you.
Oh, yeah.
In this case, we perform a timber tax basis to set our bar basically of what we've paid for and what we can harvest tax free. Yep.
So the way to kind of think this through and the way I've explained it to clients is, say you buy a rental property or just a property in general, and you keep that for 5 years or 6 months, doesn't matter, and you sell it for the exact same you paid for it, you're not going to pay taxes.
Yeah, no gain. No gain. Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is establish what did you actually pay for that timber at the time of purchase. So, you know, for example, I had a property that I did this to a while back. I had paid $210,000 for the property. But in reality, there was $45,000 worth of timber there.
Okay.
So when, you know, you look at that, really I was paying, what is that, $175 for the land and $45 for the timber. So then if I harvest up to that amount, which obviously you wouldn't take the full amount, but if you harvest up to that amount, you're not paying any taxes because there was no gain there. You're just simply liquidating the asset basically.
The asset. Yep. So that's huge, right? Because essentially the $143,000, you know, less Madison's fee is tax free.
What an asset! Like to be able to like establish that from day one that you buy it and then take from it and improve other parts of the property and sell the property for more than you bought it for and not pay.
Yeah. Well, even if hypothetically, if I sold it, if people have heard it before, I bought it for $370, bought the whole farm for $370. So if I sold it for exactly what I bought, right? I've got over a 30% return because of the
and you're
timber.
gonna sell that place for a whole lot more than that.
I mean, it's already, that area has blown up.
That's a really good property.
Yeah. So, I mean, the fact is that when you look at that side of things, and to kind of put it in perspective, because we've talked about like how do you make money off of your property, timber, oil, gas, tillable. Let's say I had 100 acres of tillable, right, at $100 per acre cash rent, right? That's $10,000 a year, which means the harvest cut that I'm getting is 10 years worth of cash rent or more.
Yeah,
almost 12 actually. In this case.
Yeah, it's rent versus like the sale of an asset.
So, and again, on that tillable, you're paying taxes on it. That income that's coming in from rent, you're paying taxes on. In this case, tax basis, tax-free on that.
The other interesting part about it is back when obviously the market slowed down quite a bit on the real estate side. But back, in 2020, 2021, I bought and sold a few pieces that I did this, took some timber off. And it seemed taking timber off made zero difference on the value of that of the land.
In terms of a recreational ground, if anything, I think it would be worth more.
That's been my opinion, is that it wouldn't.
I will say I've seen it make some difference now. Now that the market slowed down, depending on the buyer, your premium buyers.
I think the way it's cut too. To your point, if you clear cutted it, even if it was 2 years later, if you're trying to sell me a clear cut.
And that's what I was getting to is the way the harvest is done matters a lot. So you see a whole lot of properties that somebody will come in, they'll buy it, an investor will buy it, they'll harvest it right away, and as soon as the crew moves out, right on.
Yeah, I mean, all the logging roads are mud.
Sell it right away?
Right away.
Yeah, but the problem is the investor doesn't kill a 200-inch deer off it.
That's
how you offset it.
Well, and it looks like crap, dude. And it does not bring what that property should.
How's the 200-incher look on his wall?
Exactly.
I'm still saying the aesthetics of it, I think, are hard to get over.
Yeah.
I think it matters more now than it did.
Yeah.
Now, the right guy can see through some of that stuff.
Sure.
But, I don't think there's as many guys out there like us three is what, you might
Well,
think.
even put it on my side of like, and we just talked about it with a couple of properties we're looking at in Illinois. Even if it was, okay, great. Chance of killing a booner on this property every year exists. If there's no harvestable timber there, that asset is gone. It will never be back there for me to make. So I am banking on only the recreational appreciation of that property. Yeah. Versus if it at least has some timber.
Yeah, you've depleted one asset.
Down the road, even if I say, hey, listen, it's 10 years from now, but at 10 years from now, you're going to have a hell of a cut on this. There's something there they can visualize.
No doubt.
Yep.
So,
no doubt.
And it comes down to the parcel as well because, the piece that I'm hunting currently, that was cut really, really hard 4 years ago. And from the timber side, there's nothing there yet.
Right.
But from the hunting perspective, that might be one of the best 50-acre parcels in the county. Like it's, east access. You got
people will buy it
awesome
just for that.
Access.
Absolutely.
For the ravine on the bottom end, you got 7 acres of tillable versus, 40, 42.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, it's one of those pieces that, is awesome.
Yep.
It's a lot of fun knowing what to look for. Isn't it?
Yep.
It's hard to like put yourself in a mindset of like if you don't know what you're looking for, that east access, all these things that are like
everything.
Oh, that's gonna buy in. How many people are just looking at maps or looking at properties and are like, this gonna be a great deer hunting property.
Well, and people will always buy those properties. The big thing is still the neighborhood, right? I mean, like if you truly want to produce big bucks, like you can make a great property, but if there's no big bucks in the area, there's no big bucks on your. And again, size of the property is a factor there, but like on this one. I'm fairly confident of some of the buck sizes in the area. I know that there's 160 pluses in the area. This cut will effectively make this property a better deer hunting property from a habitat and hunting ability standpoint. It should do all the boxes that I'm looking to check.
Yeah.
It's going to change that property like crazy.
But it's not always that case.
And not just the neighborhood in the sense of hunting, but also, and frankly, Bomar might have been one of the first people that really highlighted this for us. We're talking about, having a good neighborhood in the sense of basically where you have good dirt, you can grow big deer, generally speaking. There's pockets better than others. Well, I mean, that's the Midwest is generally, that's, where it's at. But if you can find, a neighborhood that's not necessarily ideal habitat, like, you know, all your neighbors aren't putting food plots in.
Yeah.
Maybe it's city.
Cattle pastures.
Cattle pastures, you know, obviously not ideal for deer. And then you can come into this neighborhood, basically, the worst house in the best neighborhood type of deal, and build it into something that's awesome where deer want to be. It's like, is there a better scenario for pulling in giants?
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
I tested that there's not.
No, I think it'll be interesting. Coincidentally, you know, my new Kentucky farm is very much like that. All cattle pasture, no crops.
Well,
no
dude, look
corn
at some of
piles.
those big timber areas where, and it's not that timber's not good deer habitat, but, you know, is it? You're going to be the only guy with food.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. That's it. I mean, that's what it, and even in this one, I mean, there's no crops around us. I mean, the neighbors who are hunting are dropping corn piles, which, you know, but ultimately, again, browse is that foundation, right? So I'm gambling that between the browse and the food plot and how I hunt that property, mine will look the best in the shitty neighborhood.
Yeah. And you're going to spray a little apple stuff on your corn pile, right?
little syrup.
My corn pile's better than your corn
syrup
pile.
out there. Yeah, well, those guys are dumping like 20 tons of corn, so
when I bought corn last year, I bought directly from a farmer. Just a farmer. He's like, you want some apple spray on that? And I was like, maybe. And he gives me a little water bottle and it says apple written on it.
It's really his piss.
That's hilarious.
He bottled his urine.
Who knows? He's like, I eat them apples over there. I'm peeing this bottle.
Spray it. So, but that's kind of where we stand. I mean, and first of all, Madison, huge thank you for, first of all, driving down, but helping me in this process, because it's something that, you know, I've talked to Jared about for a long time, and on this show and podcast for a long time of, I need to do it. And the first step is just finding somebody to help you with that journey, because, you know, for most of us, it's a super intimidating thing. And so the ability to find someone, you know, I found you, Jared's got Jed, the ability to have somebody that is knowledgeable, that, and also from a deer hunting standpoint, I think for both of us, Jed and you, knowing like, okay, I know what I'm looking for in a property and the management and deer hunting ability on it, invaluable. From a discussion standpoint. So, and
Ben, since you mentioned him, you know.
Yeah, and Ben. So all of those things are really important. And again, you know, it's just sometimes it's luck of the draw, and you reaching out and us connecting, and, you know, here we are moving down the pathway on it.
Yeah.
So for people listening, again, we know you're servicing Ohio, but good chance people call you from other places. What's the best way for people to find you, get a hold of you, find out information about Treestand Forestry?
Right now, just treestandforestry.com is my website. I'm going to be partnering up with Ben a little bit on the habitat side. You know, he's got a ton of experience when it comes to setting a property up to, you know, make the, you know, obviously the timber end of things I know super well, but when it comes to the intricate little details, Ben obviously has killed some giants. And so we're hoping to work together on that end of things. I also have a YouTube channel that isn't very big, but
there's been some good stuff on it, man. Because frankly, when he sent me your stuff before we connected, that's what I went and just, I don't know. It's always good to just see who you're about to call and work with on stuff.
Trying to educate people, because back when I was, you know, just cutting for a mill, and some of the crap that you see, it's just like, dude, landowners just don't have a clue. And
how would they?
Well, and exactly. It's such a tight-knit industry, and, you know, there's a lot of general information that can be shared that can dramatically help a landowner, and that's kind of been my goal. So, and also tying in the hunting aspect of it. So,
very cool.
Awesome. So sorry, what was the best way to get a hold of you?
Treestandforestry.com. There's a form.
Form on the website.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And I connected. I think I was on your Instagram. Is how we
you can find me
connecting
any
on there.
social.
What's your Instagram?
Treestand Forestry as well. Yeah.
There you go. Well, if anybody's looking in Ohio to, you know, from forestry plan to thinking about a cut, and or, you know, on the property aspect of things, I think it's well worth looking you up and giving you a call. And we'll keep everybody updated, obviously, on our side as this kind of thing progresses. When the cut actually happens, I'm probably going to go out there and film some stuff here in the next couple weeks, obviously before a cut happens, just to show some of the things that we're looking at, kind of a before and after type of thing. And I mean, it's exciting. I mean, obviously, it's one of those things from an investment standpoint, because that's what I bought a farm is about, right? I bought a farm was, yeah, we want it for hunting. It's a tangible assets, but at the end of the day, it's got to be a smart investment here. Yep. And we've been fortunate here in the last 4 or 5 years that the appreciation of some of these properties has been so good that if you bought it and just sat on it, it was a good investment. The other side of it is, how do you make money on these properties? And not everybody has tillable, or not everybody's tapped into oil and gas. And, timber has been super intimidating to me. I'm a timber, I like timber in terms of my farms and my hunting, but to actually see this start to transform into, holy shit, this is an investment that it worked, this paid off, is really encouraging and makes me want to do it all over again. So
for sure, if you could find another deal like that, you'll be all right.
There you go, man. So anyways, Madison, we appreciate you coming in, buddy, and we'll catch everyone next week.
Later.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode of the I Bought a Farm podcast, make sure you check it out every other Thursday night on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and any other place that you might find your favorite podcast.